In this session, we are going to focus on how to write the literature review. Not just identification of key ingredients of literature review, we are going to look into examples from published research in high impact factor journals as well. Now, becoming a scholar requires a transition from a consumer or user of the literature to a producer of or contributor to the field of knowledge. Now, when you are writing a literature, obviously that must be for a research project. So what you are doing is now you are trying to be a contributor to existing research. So literature review. The purpose of the literature review is to help the researcher to build on the work of others and make informed decisions during various stages of the research project. A review of literature identifies and highlights relevant themes and documents significant findings, frameworks and/or instruments from earlier research that will serve as the foundation of the current project. Not just the literature review help you identify what relationships have been studied or whether or not those relationships were significant or not. It can help you identify the instruments that have been used, the methodology that was used to conduct earlier research. Now, it's very important that one documents the literature review. Now, documenting the literature review is important to convince the reader that the researcher is knowledgeable about the problem area. And when you are writing about a literature or when you're writing your literature review, if you document it, you can be more critical. And this shows that you have done your preliminary homework. And this is necessary to conduct the research. Now, how do you document your literature review? Now, it can help obviously keep track of what you have done so that you don't repeat unproductive searches. Something that you have done, you know that you have done it. So you do not spend time redoing everything that you have previously done. So you know what you have done if you document it, if you keep track of it. Reuse successful search strategies for future papers. So you know that okay, this strategy was successful and I got this particular information because I used this particular search string maybe in Web of Science or Scopus. So you use the same research string for a different research project or a different variable or set of variables. Now, a research paper or any literature that one reads have several points that can be documented. Now, a number of different things can be documented. However, you must be very cautious in doing so because it must be in line with what research you are conducting. If you are focusing on establishing a relationship between variables, then obviously your research or your search should focus on those particular variables that you are interested in. Now, following details are recommended to be documented as they can help in different sections of a research paper. The first one being the title of research. The second, the objectives of that particular study. Now, based on those objectives, the research questions and hypotheses drawn. Four, what theory they have focused on or what theory they have used to build their theoretical framework. What variables were there in their study? The independent variables, the dependent variables, the mediators, the moderators, if any. What gaps did they fill? Now, this is particularly important. So you know that you are not repeating something that is already done. What was their sample size and technique? Who were their respondents? What were their results? So you can identify whether or not there have been any contradictory results in existing research. This will also help you writing your discussion section as well. What were the limitations and future research directions of existing research? Keeping in line or keeping an eye on these will help you build your own research framework or your research idea, and you would know what are your contributions to existing research. And doing this, documenting all this information will actually help you improve your ability to write. Once you know this is how people have written a particular research and this has been published, so you know what jargon to use, what words to use, what to avoid, what to include. Now, literature review. It actually has two sections primarily. Obviously, it may change with the research journal that you are trying to target, or it will change obviously with the focus of your research. If you are writing a thesis, obviously you write it differently because you have got more space to write. If you are writing a research paper, you write it differently. But primarily, the focus is on two things. First, independent or individual discussion on variables. The second, how to write when developing framework to establish relationship. We all have seen research paper, and in literature review section, we normally see that first the variables are discussed individually. For instance, if I am focusing on writing a paper on corporate social responsibility and organizational performance, in literature review, first I will define or write about corporate social responsibility, then I will write about organizational performance, and finally I will have a third section on corporate social responsibility and organizational performance to establish the relationship between the two variables and propose my hypothesis. Now, what do you include when you are writing about independent or when you are conducting an independent individual discussion on variables? Now, there are a number of things that one should consider. Obviously, this list is not exhaustive. You may include or you may remove a certain things depending on whether you are writing for a thesis or a research paper. So what's the concept of the variable? How do you define this variable? What is meant by this variable? Now, is there any conceptualization of this variable in your area of study? For example, if I'm conducting a research on servant leadership, is there a definition of servant leadership in higher education? Now, has the definition changed over time? And if yes, how has it changed over time? Were any new dimensions added to it? What are the key facets characteristics that emerge from the definition? Are there any key dimensions to the concept? Now, is there any agreement on these definitions? Some basic characteristics, some basic facets that all the different researchers or scholars have identified while defining the particular concept? What does the variable do for organization? How it facilitates their working? Now, what are the implications of this variable for the organization or the industry that you are targeting or the sector that you are targeting? Now, why studying this variable or this concept is particularly important? What could be its consequences? Maybe if it's a predictor variable. Now, if it's a criterion variable, why studying the antecedents is important in your field of study? So, what could be what is the importance of this variable in a particular area of study? Now, status of literature on the variable in the field of study, is it limited? And so what are the limitations? This obviously helps you emphasize on the need to study this particular concept. How will the assessment of the variable help in the field of study? Now, why studying this variable help? Why should this variable be studied? What are the common measurements of the variable? What are the common dimensions? Which one are you using? Now, if you are using or if you are studying a variable and if there are certain common dimensions, what dimensions are you focusing on? Now, you might not include this in a research paper, but this is significantly important in a research thesis, especially for a PhD thesis. What conceptualization or operational definitions are you using in your study? So what's your operational definition for a particular variable or the concept that you are using? Now, does this conceptualization reflect in instrument measurement? Now, this is very important. Sometimes what we do is we get carried away. We find a definition interesting, easy to read, easy to understand. So we say, okay, yes, this is the definition that we are going to use. But our measuring instrument is totally in contrast to the definition that we have proposed in our literature. So your operational definition is very important. It will guide your measuring instrument. Why use this conceptualization? Is it very close to your area of study? Now we are going to look into the examples of each of these points. For example, the concept of variable. So what you do is, how do you define or how do you write about the concept of variable? So we have got this paper, Measuring Corporate Social Responsibility, a critical review of survey instruments, Corporate Social Responsibility and Environmental Management Journal. Now here is the example. Let me go through it. Okay, this is the paper, and if we go down into its literature review section, the conceptual development of CSR. So how the concept has evolved. If you look into it, we start by, actually this is one of my papers. So what we do is we start by identifying that there has been a lot of debate on CSR. and it has been identified as an elusive concept that has been debated all these years. And then what we do is we found a paper that has identified a 37 definition of the concept of CSR, and this shows the complexity of the concept. And then we start, or we actually write about one of the earliest definitions of CSR. These two definitions, followed by this, obviously some recent definitions or how the definitions have changed over time. So this actually shows that you start by identifying the earlier definitions and how the definitions have changed over the years. What different definitions have been postulated over the years. Following this, so this is how you need to present at least 2 or 3 definitions of the concept. Obviously, if it's a research paper, 1 or 2 is enough. But if you are writing a thesis, it's highly recommended that you propose 3 or 4 definitions and compare and contrast those definitions. This is how you can write about the conceptualization of CSR. What definitions are available in the literature? Now coming back. Now, is there any conceptualization of the variable in your area of study? Now, for example, if I'm studying a concept, say servant leadership in higher education or social responsibility in maybe a particular sector, is there a definition of this particular concept in that particular area? So you need to write about this. How do you write about this? This is how you can write. Now, this definition, this S. Fijani and others, 2013, defined university social responsibility. So what they did, or what the study did was that they looked into the concept of social responsibility in universities. So obviously, when you are looking into social responsibility in universities, the concept is totally different from corporations. So now you need to define this particular concept in context of the sector. So this is how they defined USR in higher education. So it's always a good idea to find a definition that fits your area of study. How the definitions have evolved or changed over time. We have already looked into this, that we started in this paper, we actually started by focusing at the earlier definitions and how the definitions have changed over time with Carroll, with Vota and others of Bowen. So how the definitions have changed over time. How did new definitions come in? And then while you are reading those definitions, keep an eye on what were the factors or what were the dimensions in the earlier definitions. And with the change of time, have the scholars or the researchers identified new dimensions, new characteristics of the concept in the definition. Again, this will lead you to identify what are the key facets, traits, characteristics that emerge from the definition. Now, this is an example. Obviously, now Dajrut 2008 noted that most CSR definition addressed either all or some of the following. So these are the key dimensions of CSR according to this paper in 2008 based on their analysis of 37 definition. But obviously you might not find a paper on that has 40 or 50 definitions, or that has reviewed 40 or 50 definitions. So what you can do is, once you are studying those definitions, obviously once you present these 3-4 definitions, you can write, okay, these are common themes that emerge from these 4 or 5 definitions. So what conceptualization or operational definition that you are going to use in your study? Does conceptualization reflects an instrument or measurement? Obviously we've discussed this point. So here you can write it like this. For example, CSR in the present study, this is taken from a paper in which they wrote that CSR in the present study is based on the instrument by Magnan and Farrell, who noted that CSR, this is the definition that an author used in their paper, and they mentioned it like this. Okay, this is the definition that we are going to use. So what is the definition that you are going to use? This is how you can write in your paper or your thesis. Now, what does the variable do for organization? Why is it important for this organization or any organization? For instance, this is how you can write about the importance of the variable. The quality of internal service is closely related to a company's overall performance. According to service profit chain perspective, the achievement of internal customer or employee satisfaction is the basis for achieving excellent external customer satisfaction. This is why studying internal customer is important. So this is how you write about why studying a particular concept is important. This is another example. The slides obviously will be shared through a link, so you can look into these slides later. So again, why studying in a particular area of study? So if you are studying a variable and you want to emphasize on its study or the need to study this particular variable in a particular field, this is how you write it. The literature suggests that higher education began its most recent focus on quality improvement efforts during the 1990s, owing to the increased competition for students and operational funds. For example, Evil 1993 suggested that the rise in TQM efforts in the 1990s was driven by the difficult financial situation in higher education system. So why TQM is important in higher education? So this is how you write about importance of a particular concept that you are studying in a particular field. Now, status of your literature or status of the literature in your field of study. While Six Sigma methodology has seen broad acceptance in the study, limited or little has been published about its use in higher education. Now, this further emphasizes the need to study a particular concept in a particular area. Obviously, when you are going through the literature, you will find these statements in existing literature. You will find that people have talked about a particular variable that it's limited. Or while studying those papers, you will get to an idea that yes, there has been a limited research on this particular area. Now, what you do is you write about this in your literature. Again, another example. Now, how will assessment, measurement, investigation of the variable help in the field of study? In order for something to be quantifiably improved, it must be able to be measured. Higher education, like many service industry, has struggled to measure service quality. Now again, why measuring service quality in higher education is important? So you need to emphasize, if you are conducting a research on a concept, why studying this concept is important. Again, another example. So common measurement or what common dimensions have been used. So for this, you can look into this paper, download this paper and have a look. Now you have to be very cautious. Your literature review should not look like annotated bibliography, but rather a story where ideas and concepts are linked. You cannot just write, okay, A said this, B said this, C said this, and that's it. This will not get you published. It should be a story where ideas are linked with each other, where concepts may contradict or complement each other. Try to use latest references wherever possible. And whenever possible, in particular, highlight the importance of the concepts, highlights its value, highlight their benefits. Having done this, the individual discussion of variable, the next step is you write on developing the framework to establish the relationship. Now, there are a few things that one should consider when developing or writing about those relationships. Has the previous studies linked the two concepts? Yes. If yes, what were their findings? You might conduct a study where there is no research or previously available research on the concept. Obviously, then you can't write about it. Then there is this important question. How do I write about something that has not been established before? Well, this is a very serious question that needs to be answered. This is the question we normally come across in our classes when we discuss thesis or research projects with our students. So we'll be discussing this in little detail, but slightly later. Are the variables in any way linked with each other? If yes, how they are linked? Were the findings of the previous studies unanimous? On the other hand, if they were contradictory, you shouldn't mention it. For example, there has been research that assesses the positive impact of CSR on organizational performance, while there is also research that has found a negative impact of CSR on organizational performance. And there has also been research that found no significant impact of CSR on organizational performance. So this is not unanimous. Obviously, this gives rise to the need to further research in this particular area. Why studying the linkage between variables is important? Why studying the linkage between these variables is significant in your field of study? How the independent variable influences or impacts the dependent variable? Obviously, this is more or less related to the previous points. Do the dimensions or traits of individual variable link with the dependent variable? Well, this is particularly important. And this may take us back to the first point. What if there is no existing research on the concept? So the first step that you should take is to look into the dimension of a particular concept and see if the dimensions are related to the other concept or not. For example, I'm not finding anything in relation to how knowledge leadership is related to project success. Okay, very good. There is no research on it. This is a very latest concept, the knowledge leadership one. So the first thing that I should do is look into what knowledge leadership is. What are the key traits of knowledge leadership? So a knowledge leadership is one where leader facilitates knowledge intensive activities. So I can look into literature and find that a leader who facilitates knowledge intensive leadership, that particular leader finds more success in his organization or her organization. So this is how you develop a map of relationship. You might not find direct relationship established in existing research, but obviously you might find something that is related to the traits or dimensions of a particular concept that may be related to the other variable. Use theory to develop linkages. This is particularly important. As mentioned earlier, your research might get rejected because you did not use any particular theory to develop linkages or identify any particular theory. Now we are going to look into example for each one of them. The first thing, has the previous studies linked the two concepts? If yes, what were their findings? Now this is an example. Now in this study, their study which involved a review of 52 earlier surveys about the correlation between CSR and company performance showed that more socially responsible companies had stronger economic results. So existing research does tell us that CSR leads to improved organizational performance. Another example in Retab et al. 2019, connection between CSR operations and company fund. The outcome indicated that CSR has a positive association with all three determinants of company performance. Now, are the variables in any way linked with each other? Were the findings of the previous study unanimous? On the other hand, contradictory? Now, this is how you write about these. Studies on the relationship between market orientation and innovativeness have produced contradictory results. And this is how you explain the contradictory results. That 23 of them found positive correlation while others found a weak or non-significant correlation. So obviously there is a need to further research on market orientation and innovativeness. Why studying this linkage is important in general? So by addressing these important questions, internal suppliers can understand why service areas that they should concentrate on to effectively improve their internal service quality and internal customer satisfaction, while avoiding the investment of much money and other resources in providing service quality dimensions that may not pay off. So why studying these relationship is important in general. Now this is another example. Obviously I'll share the slides and provide the link in the description section. Now why studying in this particular relationship is important in your area or field of study. Another example, quality assurance is one of the core elements of Bologna process. So the quality of service concept is particularly important in higher education. So why studying quality assurance is important in higher education? This is why it's important, because university education in general and the quality of it in particular are linked in order to respond to education demands of quality and social responsibility that the current situation demands. Another example. Now this is obviously something that is repetitive. So these are the example how variables are interlinked with each other. Now, if there is a link between the dimensions of the concepts, for example, the dimensions of CSR linked with organizational performance. Now, a particular dimension may be more contributing to the improvement of organizational performance, or maybe servant leadership. A particular dimension of servant leadership may strongly influence the outcome of a particular variable. So you need to write about these as well. And finally, and most importantly, you need the theory to develop the linkage. For example, you might be studying a variable or a relationship that has not been studied previously. Now, this particular example is a clear-cut example of a relationship that was not studied before this particular study, This is one of my studies where we studied the relationship between servant leadership and career satisfaction. And this was the first study to study this relationship. Now, what we did was we used LMX theory to develop the relationship. Now, how did we do this? So, the theoretical link between these two constructs can be described in light of LMX theory. Now, what is LMX theory? LMX theory has shown to be one of the most compelling theories for understanding the impact of leadership on organizational behavior. The main premise of this theory is that leadership behaviors contribute to the development and maintenance of strong interpersonal relationship between the leaders and followers and are instrumental in helping employees reach their fullest potential. Obviously, when one reaches their fullest potential, they are more or less going to go up the ladder in their career, and then obviously they will be satisfied with their career. So now this LMX theory has helped us improve the identification of how servant leadership helps enhance career satisfaction. Another example, again from one of our papers, according to KBV, knowledge-based view, knowledge is created, stored, and utilized by individuals and not by organizations as a whole. Coordinating and integrating the knowledge held by individual is a difficult task. Now, who coordinates? Who integrates? Obviously, it's the job of the leader. This can be made possible when an organization has knowledge experts in managerial position who are competent and know how to acquire, store, and transfer knowledge. What we are doing here is that we were trying to establish the relationship between knowledge leadership and knowledge management process, but there is no previous research on knowledge leadership and knowledge management processes. So we used KBV to establish this relationship, and this is how we did it, and the paper got published. So you can use your theory to establish the relationship between variables, and this is how you do it. Obviously, in the description I'll mention some of the references as well that you can use to understand how theory is being used to develop relationship between variables. Now, looking at some of these papers, if we go into this is obviously this paper has been discussed. This is another paper where the relationship between servant leadership and career satisfaction was established using a theory, that is the LMX theory, and then the hypothesis was proposed. Another paper, this is how the conceptualization. Okay, now what was done in this paper is that this paper actually looked into this framework: impact of corporate social responsibility on organizational performance with mediating role of team outcomes. Now, if you look into this paper, only corporate social responsibility is defined or explained individually. Now, followed by this, the relationships are explained. OP is not defined individually. OP may be defined in here in the text. Similarly, team outcomes. Each of the team outcome is first defined, and then based on the theory, how these team outcomes are related with different concepts in the study. This is done. Or how CSR influences maybe team identification using social identity theory. So each of the paragraph actually focuses on how the variables are related. So in a paper, obviously you have limited space, so you do not need to define each and every variable individually. What you can do is, while developing your relationship, you can first define the variables and then how they are interlinked with each other. Can be done in the literature. I hope the video would have helped you understand how to write your literature. Thank you very much.